Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary McGuire, Director of Public and Legislative Affairs at AAA Northeast, and I'd like to welcome you all to Wind, Rain, and Hurricanes, oh my, how to protect your property from Mother Nature. Sadly, it's been a year of natural disasters across this country. More than 14,000 homes have burned in the raging California wildfires, and Hurricane Laura, one of the most powerful hurricanes to ever strike the U.S., destroyed more than 8,000 homes. Tornadoes have taken a toll across the nation, and here in New England, we've watched severe weather bring down trees, damaging homes, sheds, vehicles, boats, and more. And despite the drought here in the Northeast, we've also weathered significant flooding in some areas. Fortunately, we did have a beautiful Labor Day weekend. I always like to end the bad news with an up note. So with us now to talk about how you can prepare in advance to protect your property and to walk us through the steps you should take if your property is damaged are two experts. Frank Doyle, Senior Vice President of Insurance at AAA Northeast, and Jody DeSantis, Managing Director of Insurance Sales at AAA Northeast. Welcome to both of you, and hello to our audience today. This program is being recorded if you'd like to share it with friends later. And we invite you to type any questions you have into the chat box during the program, and we will try to get to those questions as we wrap up this morning. And by the way, we already have quite a few questions, so I think we're going to be very busy with Frank and Jody today. So Frank, let me start with you, and let's start with the topic of prevention. Two named hurricanes are right now churning in the Atlantic, and I have to confess that I live in the woods, as you know, and I've had 5 trees come down in my backyard in severe storms here in Massachusetts this past summer. I certainly could have prepared better by removing trees that were close to my house. But when a storm is forecast, we all know that people don't always have a lot of time to get ready. So Frank, what are the most important steps people can take to prepare and really use an ounce of prevention?
Thank you, Mary. I think before we get into nuts and bolts of insurance, what's important really is to focus on personal and family safety. When a storm has been predicted, you normally have time to get prepared, but the important thing is to make sure you're thinking about your safety, your family safety, and pets if you have any. The nuts and bolts of insurance are important, and we'll get into a lot of specifics. Here in the Northeast, typically when you talk about a tropical storm or a hurricane, generally it's more of a rain event. We get some wind damage often near the coast, certainly Long Island or Rhode Island, or occasionally Connecticut will get some damage. But we have had some storms come up, hurricanes Sandy, Irene, and years ago Bob, that have caused some damage. And that's where you want to get into both managing how you handle insurance, but also looking after the safety of your family. Part of that comes into prevention, which you're getting into, Mary. And in our case in the Northeast, you really want to think about what causes a problem, what kind of damage might we have at our home or to our vehicles. And it really boils down to a couple of buckets. Wind, certainly, and often when we talk about wind in the Northeast, we talk about trees and where they end up. Water, fire, and we also talk about electricity. Typically, it means the tree fell, you lose electricity. And we'll get into some specifics here. But when the electricity comes back on, that can be as much of a problem as when you lost it. And whether you have a sump pump at your home, or maybe you have a well where electricity fires the well, or excuse me, fires the pump, you need to make sure you're thinking carefully in advance about if the storm hits, what might happen when I lose power, what happens when the power comes back on. And for example, will that nice central air conditioning system get fried if it's still set in the on position? And the power comes back on. So I
think I told you that I have a well, and that our power went out, so we lost our well, and I left the faucets on upstairs by accident and ended up with a flood. So that's exactly the type of thing you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, we need to think about your insurance, Mary.
We do. We'll talk later.
Yeah, if losing power, it's particularly troubling. If you have a well, and you might even have a sump pump also, you lose power. Now you have water in your basement and you don't have water in your sink. So both of those things are a problem for anyone. You can't cook, you can't eat, you can't shower, all that stuff. So part of we recommend is very often consider a generator. It's common to lose power, not just for the hurricane, but a winter ice storm. Consider a generator, whether it's full house or just partial, but also consider having a licensed electrician install it. So again, you don't create another problem by solving a different one.
That's really good advice. And Jody, I know you and I had talked previously about the fact that you can do some prep work right in your yard in terms of stowing away some things that might become missiles in a storm. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to prepare by taking anything inside that may become a projectile if we do have high winds. And, you know, don't be fooled. It doesn't take that much of a high wind to take an umbrella that you may have in your backyard or your lawn furniture or even your trash can. And that can be a projectile that could damage not only your home, your shed, your property, but also your neighbor's property. So you want to take that into consideration as well. So take those things inside if you can, or secure them. You would also want to think about if you have a boat that might be on a mooring or at a dock, you always want to be sure that you can get down there and secure the lines on your boat. Even a bicycle that you might have sitting in your driveway, again, try to take that inside. And another thought would be to be sure that your mobile devices are charged up before you lose power. I found myself parked in my driveway with my car running, trying to charge up my mobile device. But you always want to have those handy so that you can get weather alerts or you can get an alert to when your power may be restored. So it's important to charge all those mobile devices up before the storm hits.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we always bring out the flashlights and all of those other things too. And we see people in the photo here boarding up their windows, which is another thing that may make sense, especially if you live on the coast. One of the other things that we've seen this summer, certainly widespread across our territory, has been power outages as a result of severe weather. So Frank, what can you tell us about how to protect yourself and your electronics from power outages, and what kind of recourse does insurance offer in the event of a power outage?
Yeah, in the Northeast, the first thing I think about when I think about power outages really are your trees. Because often what happens is you have a wind event or in the winter, obviously ice. The limb comes down, it comes down on a power line. So obviously if that happens, number one, you not only lose power, but you could have a live wire down and you want to stay away from that. Connected to that, obviously, is the concept of having a generator if you do lose power. But let's go upstream to prevent it. It's a good idea every couple of years to, as I say, give the trees around your property a good haircut. Have professional, obviously, if it's above just a few feet, and keep as many limbs as you can away from power poles, power lines. Obviously, you can only do that on property you own, and you hope that the power company or town you live in will do the same. So good maintenance of your home, including your trees, can help prevent a power loss. But if you do have it, generator makes total sense. But also think about while power might be out, either making sure you have surge protectors or unplugging some of your core electronics, not your fridge, obviously, to protect them when the power comes back on can save you both a headache and an expense. Insurance is very good about covering the damage that's going to be caused by lightning or surge of power, that kind of thing. But when you lose power, it's often the risk of not just the food spoilage in your fridge, but also what happens when the power comes back on and causing some damage. We literally have had customers with very severe fires because they left something on top of the stove while the power was out. Power comes back on, they left a burner on, unfortunately. So you can cause a pretty dangerous fire by leaving something on or in the stove if it happens to be on and you don't see it because the power is out.
What a great suggestion, just to unplug, to use the surge protector, and to take things off the stove and to really check to see what's on and what's not on. Jody, we had talked about also food spoilage and the fact that insurance does sometimes provide some relief there. Can you chat with us about that?
Right. One of the first things you're going to think of when that power does go out is what's going to happen to that food in my refrigerator or my freezer. And oftentimes folks have another freezer where they store meats. So you want to just think about, first of all, keep the refrigerator and the freezer closed as much as possible. And think about that, especially if you have children. Children have that tendency to open up the refrigerator door and keep it open for several minutes while they're thinking about what they'd like to snack on. So keep the refrigerator door closed. However, if you lose power for more than several hours, most likely you are going to have to discard the food that has spoiled. And we always say, when in doubt, throw it out. Don't take any chances on spoiled food. Discard it. You can have coverage on your insurance policy. Oftentimes, the very basic homeowner's insurance policy does not include the food spoilage coverage. So you will want to add on an endorsement. It's very inexpensive to cover your food spoilage. And most insurance carriers will pay you for that food spoilage without even a deductible. They'll waive the deductible and pay you in full for the food spoilage up to the policy limits. So very inexpensive, definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, we actually have a small portable generator that we use to power our refrigerator and a lamp or two in the event of a power outage, but good advice to have that generator wired by an electrician. Had not thought of that, so good advice for our audience. So let's talk about trees for a moment, because much of damage seems to center around trees. And as I said, I had 5 trees go down in my yard in storms this past summer. Actually, 3 of the trees belonged to my neighbor, but landed in our yard, and 2 of the trees were ours, and 1 landed on my shed. So first of all, I think the advice to give your trees a haircut is really important. Tree work is expensive, but it can save you a lot of time, trouble, and damage in the long run if you remove trees that are way too close to your home. But let's talk about if a tree falls on your home, Frank, what is the first thing that you should do?
Well, the first concern there is everyone safe? If you have a tree hitting your fence or something, that's different. But if a tree hits your home, you know, you're probably calling your fire department before you're calling your insurance company, just to make sure everyone's safe. Get people out of the house. The concern there is you could have further damage. It could threaten the integrity of the structure, that kind of thing. You want to be safe. So getting out and calling 911 is the first thing I think you want to do there. In terms of the insurance side of it, a tree falling down and hitting one of your structures or your car, insurance is going to respond very well there. We should talk a little more specifically about updating your insurance in a minute, but a tree hitting your home or your fence, whether it's your tree or not, is important there. And generally, if a tree is falling on your property, it's your problem. If it does hit any one of your structures, insurance will help you in terms of the expense there. If it falls in your yard, you're calling someone with a chainsaw and a pickup.
We've had a lot of chainsaws in my yard over the last couple of months, that's for sure. So just to clarify, if your neighbor's tree falls in your yard, it's your problem, as you say. If a tree falls on your home or shed, then insurance will most likely provide you with coverage.
Yeah, we recommend a good neighbor policy. You know, if your tree is dangling over someone else's property, talk to your neighbor. You don't want to endanger your neighbor, nor would you want them endangering you. So you want to practice a good neighbor policy if you can. But trying to avoid a problem is always the better path than waiting for it to happen. And you do see some dramatic pictures in a hurricane or a tornado, which can happen in the Northeast. We've had a couple of instances with tornadoes in previous years, and they'll do just horrible damage in a very concentrated area. A lot of it is related to trees, and obviously we tend to live in homes that are frame or made of wood, which is certainly subject to wind damage.
Right.
Yeah, we had that significant storm several years ago in Munson in Western Mass where we had a tornado. Right. So you're absolutely right. Our weather is so unpredictable, which is one of the reasons why we're talking today. Jody, what if a tree falls on your car? First of all, what can you do to prevent that from happening? And what should you do if it does happen?
So to add to what Frank said, I mean, as far as always ensuring that you're performing regular tree maintenance, you know, if you have branches or limbs that are overhanging of the house or the shed or your driveway where you park your car, you definitely want to trim those back on a regular basis. Also, be careful if you have a tree that may be rotting or dying. It is your responsibility that if you have a tree that is rotting or dying, that you remove it. Because if that tree does fall and damage, you know, property, your neighbor's property, you know, that is your responsibility if you were aware of the tree's condition. If a tree does fall on your vehicle, as long as you have a comprehensive insurance, or sometimes otherwise called other than collision insurance on your vehicle, you would be covered under your auto insurance policy. A deductible would apply, whichever deductible you carry on your policy. And just, I did want to add one thing to what Frank mentioned about the damage to the home. Your homeowner's insurance will also cover additional living expenses. So if you do need to move out of your home for some time while the home is being repaired, your homeowners will provide coverage. Homeowners insurance will provide coverage for those expenses for either your hotel room or your dining out or whatever that may be while they're repairing your home.
That's a really good point. I would not have thought of that, and I think that's great advice for our listeners, for sure. What about flooding? We have seen, I know, some significant flooding in Norwood, Mass. In the past month, significant flooding episode in Worcester, where I saw many cars submerged in water. What are the steps that you can take, number one, to protect yourself against flooding, Frank, depending on where you live? And what should you think about in advance?
Yeah, there are two aspects of that, Mary. I happen to live in the Worcester area, so everyone knows the areas that flood, particularly the roads where you're going under the railway bridge. It's flooded for years every time there's a big rainstorm. Anytime you're coming across standing water in your car, it's not a good idea to drive through it. Your car's not a boat, right? There were a few that were made years ago that were. So you want to avoid, if you're driving, you want to avoid standing water. It's not a good thing. You can total out your car very easily by driving into deep water and shorting out all the electricity in your car. But also there's the residential side of flooding. Whether you are renting an apartment, whether you own a condo or your own home, flooding is important because it's a separate policy. Flooding is not covered under your typical homeowner policy. Flooding can happen any time of year. You don't have to be living next to a river or near the coast to be in a floodplain. And the coverage is different, and you need to buy it specifically for your residence. If you're a tenant, you can buy it for your contents, for example. And with a condo and home, you can do it for your structure and contents. In New England or New Jersey, New York, there are a lot of people that will finish their basements. That's where flooding is the biggest problem. Insuring the contents in your basement isn't easy. The National Flood Policy doesn't always cover contents in your basement, except for certain types of homes. So generally for flood insurance, people are only buying it when they're forced to, when they're taking on a mortgage. It's unfortunate because when your home is damaged by rising water, by those floods, that's the only policy that will come in and provide you some financial relief to what is a complicated home or claim to respond to. Complicated repairs, you start worrying about mold in your home. That policy is going to give you an extra pile of money to help restore the home in a safe way, which can often be quite expensive.
Is it difficult to obtain flood insurance, Jody? Is it something that is challenging, and is it extremely expensive, or what should people expect?
So by and large, the vast majority of properties participate in NFIP approved communities. So for the most part, most people can purchase flood insurance. What we find is folks that are not in a high risk flood zone, as Frank mentioned, or their mortgagee or their lender is not requiring it, choose not to purchase it, which can be a mistake because more than 20% of flood claims occur on properties that are not in a high risk flood zone. So if it can rain where you live, it can flood where you live. So we definitely recommend that everybody considers purchasing flood insurance. And if you're not in a high risk flood zone, it's actually inexpensive. So you can call your insurance agent. If you don't have an insurance agent that offers flood, you can certainly call AAA insurance. But we can certainly look up and confirm that your community is approved, that you're eligible to purchase flood insurance. We can confirm which your flood zone you're in. Are you in a high risk flood zone or non-high risk? And give you a quote within minutes.
So I grew up on a high hill in Maryland. We never had a flooded basement in all the time that I was growing up, and moved to Massachusetts 30 years ago. And lo and behold, discovered the hard way when I had about 18 inches of water in my basement that we were located at the bottom of a floodplain. And, that's something, Frank, that I think you had mentioned that I think is really interesting, that before you buy a home, you may want to do some investigating, and that also talking to your neighbors who have been around for a long time about what kind of weather episodes they've seen can be helpful. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, throughout the Northeast, we have not only flood zones, but we have a lot of coastline. So before you're buying any particular home, it's smart to talk to your insurance agent. AAA can help you with that. And to take a look at, is homeowner insurance available and is it affordable? If you're buying that beautiful house near the water, insuring it is difficult. And a home even inland can be in a floodplain. So looking at what the insurance would be, is it available, number one, is it affordable, and what kind of deductibles would you end up with? Makes sense far ahead of time. Flood insurance has changed a lot in the last few years. The maps have changed. So if you're buying a home that's inland and not in a high hazard zone, flood insurance can be quite moderate. But if you're looking at something near, high velocity flood zone or near the beach, the price per year for flood insurance can end up being $15,000, which is a staggering amount when you think about buying a home. But also look at insuring the home itself before you buy. And again, if you're buying something that is closer to the coast, you're going to pay for that privilege, not just with the home price, but with how insurance is available, and also what deductibles you'll end up with. And we should take a minute and talk a little bit more about how deductibles work when it comes to hurricanes.
So do you want to talk about that, Frank, about deductibles and what people should know, just some basic information?
Yeah, we recommend, AAA insurance, we recommend that you essentially do a review of your insurance at least once a year. Has the value of your home changed? If you have different contents, if you've added on a deck or maybe solar panels on the roof, that kind of thing. Make sure that what we call the replacement cost is current, because all of your coverages are based on that initial cost. What would it be to replace your home in total today? That's the insurance amount you're buying. And when you, from there, take a look at insuring a home that's near the coast, you could end up with something that's called either a hurricane deductible, windstorm deductible. I'm sorry to get into an insurance geek language here, but every state is different. So if you have a hurricane deductible that's 5%, you might think, oh, it's 5% of the damage to my home. Yeah, maybe that's not a big deal. It's 5% of the value of your home. So you can have a deductible of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 without really thinking about it. So it's important to consult with your insurance agent and to understand, okay, if wind comes to my home in different forms, even a winter storm, how does it affect me? Is it a windstorm, a hurricane, or just your everyday storm? So what's updating the value of your home and understanding what risk you're holding, not just what insurance you're buying, is a very important part of it.
That's an important distinction, Frank. Thank you, and good information for people to know. Jody, we've talked a lot about the problems of homeowners, but what about renters and rental insurance? How important is that for people to have? When does it come into play? How much does it cost? What can you tell us for those of us in the audience or who are with us today who are renters?
So it's important to note that hurricanes, windstorms, all of these items that we've talked about today can also impact tenants or renters. If you think about wind damage, water damage, lightning, fire, if you're renting an apartment or you're renting a home, you need to consider your belongings, your furniture, your clothing, all of your belongings. You need to protect those. It's a common misconception that my landlord's going to protect my belongings, and that is not the case. The tenant is responsible for insuring their own belongings. And renter's insurance is very inexpensive. You can purchase a renter's insurance policy for as little as $10 to $15 per month. And most insurance carriers will actually give you a discount off your auto insurance policy if you bundle the two together. So it's a win-win. You're protecting yourself, your belongings, and you're saving money in the long run on your auto insurance. But it's very important. It's something that's commonly overlooked.
Yeah, and always important to ask your insurance agent about bundling, about the possibility of saving some money through bundling. Our final topic is something that you just referenced, Jody, and that's fire. So Frank, let me go to you and ask about prevention. What's the best way to prevent a fire in your home and the best way to protect your home and keep it safe?
Well, the first thing that all of us do, I'm sure, is to make sure we have carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in our homes. That's generally required, and it's absolutely important for life safety. So that's the first thing, is protecting us, protecting the people in your home. It's always a good idea to have a fire extinguisher that's current in your home, but also making sure that you're not using your electricity inappropriately. It's easy around Christmas time to plug in, too many lights in that extension cord you bought, 1964, or your parents maybe gave you in 1964. It's unsafe. It's not worth the money. There are problems with electricity that are more related to winter. That space heater that someone's relying on, that's not safe. So in some instances, it's really related to how you're using electricity you already have. But also in some cases, it's related to doing some work in your home without using a licensed electrician. Electricity can easily cause a fire. And I mentioned earlier the case of a homeowner leaving something on top of their stove when the power was out. You can have unfortunate things happen when power comes back on. So safe installation and use of wiring in your home is critical, and making sure that when it comes to plugging more things in, you're not overtaxing the electrician, or rather the electrical work you've already had done in your home. A couple of very basic things that everybody should follow.
Yeah, my father-in-law built his own home, and he always used to say that the one thing he would not do himself was to do any kind of electrical work, just for the reasons that you talked about. So wise counsel there. So Jody, in the event of a fire, what does insurance generally cover, and what advice do you have for our audience today? So you're not having a power outage there.
No. In general, homeowners insurance will cover damage by fire. I think the key is, as Frank mentioned earlier, is to ensure that your homeowners insurance policy is up to date. We've had many customers who have decided to remodel a kitchen and put in a nice fancy kitchen over that builder's grade kitchen that they had in the past, or they add an additional room onto their home, and they do not think about calling their insurance agent to advise them that they've made these changes to their structure. And come time of a claim, when there's a fire, they find that they're underinsured. So it's very important to always consider the value that you're covered for on your property. First thing you should do is think of calling your insurance agent if you're going to be making any changes, upgrades, anything. And I did want to add one other thing as far as prevention, if you don't mind. Candles. Candles are a very common cause of fire, believe it or not. And most people don't think of it. I know they can be romantic. However, candle left unattended is a very common cause of fire, especially if you have children or you have pets. They could very easily knock the candle over. It could catch fire to a tablecloth or a curtain, and before you know it, it's a disaster. So I do recommend, if you are going to use a candle, do not leave it unattended. But when you have a power outage, grab the flashlight and the batteries instead of the candle.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think I've read that one of the top 3 causes of home fires is an unattended candle. So something that we can always think about, but really important to remember. So we are going to extend our time this morning because we have quite a few audience questions, which is terrific. So I'm going to try to get through as many of these as I can with you. So our first question from our audience is to you, Frank. Will filing a claim increase my insurance premium?
Well, part of the conversation that you've heard from us today is kind of managing risk and making sure that if you do use your insurance, it's for something substantial. Part of what we try to do is to make sure that you're not just insured properly, but you're using insurance properly. And if you file an occasional extreme claim, that's not the kind of thing that changes your insurance rates generally. However, what can happen is if you file smaller claims over time, you're going to lose your insurance in total. So it's not always a question of the price changing with homeowners as much as the company might want to part company with you. So we very much encourage customers, file a claim when you really need to, don't file a small one. You might lose a credit here and there for being, loss free, that kind of thing. But managing your insurance so that you can keep it is more often the concern. It's less, you might have somewhat of a price change. It's not quite the same as automobile insurance that's directly connected to how am I driving today, if I've been caught speeding down the street, or have I had an at-fault accident.
Well, again, good advice and good information, and hopefully that answered our listener's question. We have a couple more questions here, one of them involving tree maintenance, Jody. And the question is, can we call the utility company to check the trees, or do we have to call a private tree company? So what's the best way to handle that?
If your trees are overarching upon wires, you should call a utility company to come out and check. They should be performing tree maintenance just as a homeowner should, to ensure that wires and utility poles are not impeded upon by overhanging trees. But if the trees are in your yard and just impeding upon your roof, then it is your responsibility. So you should call a tree maintenance company and to come out. I wouldn't attempt to do it yourself. I would definitely call a professional.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Keep in mind what I said earlier about trees that are rotting and dying. You definitely need to take care of those quickly.
Yeah, really a great question, though, I think, whether or not you can call the utility company or a private tree company. So thanks for that information. We have a question from one of our listeners, viewers this morning, who lives on the coast. And he would like to know, with sea level rising, what do you see happening to flood insurance rates? And sort of moving, what can a homeowner do to protect against exorbitant rates? Frank, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Yeah, the seacoast is a tough area because to actually maintain maybe a retaining wall or something like that right near the coast is difficult. You see a lot of stories. Situate, Mass always comes to mind, or the Gloucester area. That's pretty challenging because you're fighting Mother Nature more than you're fighting your insurance company. When I mentioned before that the flood maps have changed, a lot of the reference points now are what's called your base flood elevation. Where are you relative to that floodplain? So what's happened is the rates have gone up quite a lot if you have an exposure immediately to the coast or to a source of flooding water. So that's become quite expensive. If you have the policy already, there are many cases where you were grandfathered. It's become a major part of owning property near the coast, and particularly on it, that those premiums can be, I mentioned $15,000 a year. That wasn't fictitious. I know people with those numbers. It's quite expensive. So in many ways, you're paying rather dearly to live right on the coast. And the issue of literally shoring up the shore, sorry for the pun, it is more challenging, and you need, very talented engineers to help you if you're right on the water. That's not an easy one.
Yeah, it's not an easy one. Certainly there are risks that come along with the joys of living on the coast, but certainly relevant to a lot of our AAA members because we have so much coastline in our territory. So something for people to think about and consider, and good information there again. Jody, we have another question from a viewer. What about water damage not caused by a flood, but caused by rain, for example, a significant rain event? Does your regular homeowner's policy cover something like this, damage resulting from rain? And we saw that awful photograph of the rain coming through the ceiling a few minutes ago into someone's living room. What about that?
So what we commonly hear about is rain damage where a structure is broken. So either a window breaks and water comes in through the window and then damages your contents, or you have water damage from, as you mentioned earlier, Mary, you leave a sink running and your bathtub overflows, and next thing you know, your ceiling is falling in on your living room. So water damage such as that would normally be covered by your typical homeowner insurance policy. I know that we had some conversations hinted toward mold damage earlier. I believe Frank hinted toward mold damage. Mold damage you have to be very careful with. Your common mold damage that may have been in the home for several months or years would not normally be covered under your basic homeowner policy. However, if you did not have mold previously and now you have water damage and that now causes mold, you should be able to get coverage, but you need to identify it right away and take care of it right away. And Frank, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I think you're spot on, Jody. You know, the upstairs laundries in homes are really convenient. You're going from the bedroom using the washer upstairs, and then you're going out when the washer is running, and the hose bursts, and it runs the whole time you're out for a few hours and causes, you know, a few $100,000 worth of damage. That's
a bad day. That's a very bad day.
All right, so unfortunate things, you know, are often where insurance pays out the most. So a small piece of advice on that: those flexible steel hoses, please buy them. Don't go with the cheap rubber ones. Make sure that they're not old. You cannot buy a new washer without buying new hoses. That's fine with me.
You know what? We laugh, but that is such a great piece of advice. We have the steel hoses, and again, something we learned the hard way, but boy, they can prevent so much damage. And we just saw those pictures of mold. That's something that you really want to take care of right away after you have a flood. Am I correct about that? Because that can come back to haunt you, especially if you sell your house and you suddenly pull up that carpet and you haven't taken care of the problem. Jody, I see you shaking your head, yes?
But yes, exactly. I mean, you want to identify, okay, now I have water damage. I now place the claim. When the adjuster comes in to assess the damage from the water, they're going to look for mold. And if they find it, you need to take care of it immediately. And as long as it's related to that damage for that claim, it will be covered under the same loss. If you don't take care of it right away and it festers, you sell that home, person, you know, purchases that home, and you know they find the mold damage later, then you know unfortunately they're out of luck. So you really need to take care of that damage immediately.
Good advice. And that brings us to our last question. And I'm not sure if I'm exactly clear on what the question is, but I'm going to give it a try here. And so we have a question: what is a preferred flood zone? And apparently the person asking this question is looking at a home near conservation land. So, Frank, I don't know if you want to comment on that one.
Well, there are preferred rates. You know, if you're considering a home, you know, talk to one of the AAA insurance agents that handles flood insurance. What they'll do is use the exact location of your home, and now it's down to the location of the structure, not just the piece of land you're buying, to get into, do you qualify for a preferred rate? It's common that flood insurance can be $400 or $800, you know, in the preferred zones. But when you get into conservation land, sometimes you're closer to a high hazard zone. So getting into to know what's your base elevation, base flood elevation, and exactly what zone the structure is in are two parts of that. Are you 15 feet above any kind of surface water, for example, is an important beginning part of that conversation. If you're buying an existing home, you don't have the issue of are you doing a perk test near conservation land, but you do still have the issues of what rate do I qualify for when it comes to flood insurance. Did I miss anything on that, Jody?
The only thing that I would want to mention is you will find that there are flood insurance policies out there that are backed by NFIP. And then you will also find that there are private flood insurance companies that will offer insurance at a lower premium. And you just need to be careful. Just do your research if you decide to go with a private insurer. You may find that the premiums are less. However, because they're not backed by NFIP, they can withdraw from the market at any time. And if you have a policy that is backed by NFIP and you're grandfathered in, for example, you move to a private insurer, you could lose that rate that you were grandfathered into. So just do your research. That would be my only recommendation.
So we actually have one additional question. This will be the last question. Should a homeowner hire a private adjuster versus your own insurance adjuster? Frank, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, for some reason, that's become common in some of our states. And it tends to set up an adversarial relationship between the insurance company you're already with and the homeowner. What I would recommend is, start by looking at what the coverage you have, talk to your agent before you report the loss, right? And work with the adjuster from the company. And then if you have some concern, go back to your agent Your agent is there to work with you as a policyholder, as a customer, to make sure that the value of your policy is responding appropriately. An adjuster is often looking for a fee out of the coverage you've already bought and really creates an adversarial situation. The company would rather be able to take a look at the property directly, not have to go through a third party. So unless you're upset with your company, I would recommend you deal directly with them and involve your agent with any kind of concerns you have.
And speaking of dealing directly with your agent and talking and getting advice, Mark, if you want to put that slide up, that would be terrific. You know, you can call us, you can call Frank and Jody at AAA at any time. You can call anyone else on our insurance team at AAA Northeast, and you can discuss these issues that you've learned a little bit more about today with them. We're always more than happy to take time to chat with you about all sorts of issues, whether it's flood insurance, renter's insurance, an umbrella policy, bundling, all of those kinds of things are things that you can talk with Jody, with Frank, and with their team about at any time. So you see that number on your screen, 866-222-7871, or simply visit us at AAA.com/insurance for more information. You'll find all sorts of great information on our website as well. So I'm so glad we were able to get to 6 or 7 audience questions. That's just terrific. I hope everybody profited from getting some more information this morning. Frank and Jody, thank you once again for sharing your expertise with us on how to best protect our homes from Mother Nature. It's all about the safety and security of our families, for sure. We hope we've given all of you in our audience some tips that will make you and your families safer in your homes or in your rental properties. A big shout out to Alex Latke and Mark Shieldrop for their work behind the scenes. Always terrific. And thanks to all of you for being with us. Stay safe and have a great day. For AAA Northeast, I'm Mary McGuire with Frank Doyle and Jody DeSantis. Bye-bye.